Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond. Chancellor, big budget? Boring budget?
Balanced budget, Robert.
OK, so that's sort of firmly in the middle, is it? What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is we've got to continue to be fiscally responsible.
Right.
We've got to continue to invest in Britain's post-Brexit
So you'll hit your fiscal
future.
targets?
I'll set out on Wednesday where we are with fiscal targets. We've got to continue to invest in our productivity in Britain's future.
Yeah.
But we've also got to listen to the noise we're hearing from individuals, from organisations about the pressures they're feeling right at the moment. We're not deaf, we're listening to those, and we'll do what we can to help.
And what people are saying, I mean, we asked our viewers what they wanted their priority to be. The health service was top of their list. Will there be more money for health?
Well, of course, we understand that the NHS is a vitally important service that people depend on hugely, and we want to work with the NHS.
And the head of the NHS, Simon Stevens, has said that if there isn't extra money, you know, your targets for waiting lists won't be hit, the Prime Minister's priorities on mental health won't be met.
Well, of course, Simon Stevens set out the NHS five-year forward view, which we funded in full, and we want to work with him.
He's now saying he wants more, though.
He is, but we want to work. But to be fair to Simon Stevens, demand has turned out to be higher than was expected at the time that view was put together. So we want to work with him, with the NHS, with the Department of Health, to make sure that we can get back on track.
So that does sound like a bit of a nod that he might not be disappointed.
But we've got to do this in an intelligent way. We've got to look to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is spent well, that we eliminate waste wherever we can, and that we focus resources on the front line. So we will definitely work with the NHS.
Now, one of the important developments of the past couple of months is you did send out a pretty strong signal that 1% pay cap on public service workers was no longer going to be enforced in a completely strict way. But will there be extra money for departments to give those pay rises, or are they just going to have to find those pay rises from efficiency savings?
Well, two separate things here. First of all, we've removed the blanket cap that we had in place, so that individual departments will have their departmental workforce plans, their service workforce plans, that will take account of the particular challenges and issues that they have in their workforces, recruitment and retention issues, for example. And they will be able to make, to submit evidence to their pay review bodies as they see fit. Separately, of course, we have to manage the public services overall in a way that recognises the fiscal constraints that we face. So we want to ensure that we drive value for money. Where we're doing workforce reform, we want to see win-win situations where people can earn more money, but in exchange for working practices which allow the service to be delivered more efficiently. We think we can do this, win-win.
But a bit of extra money for more pay?
Well, you'll have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
OK. Now, the other great priority that many of your MPs say that you really got to pursue, including actually the Communities Minister, your colleague, Sajid Javid, is housing. You know, there is a shortage of housing, particularly affordable housing in this country. What are you going to do about that?
Well, the problem is the affordability of housing, and for too many years we've been building too few homes, and we haven't been building them in the right places to address where the real crunch points of affordability are. So we had some great data this week, 217,000 new homes built in the last year. That's a dramatic increase on where we were in 2010.
Still not enough, though.
We've built 1.1 million new homes
probably
since
still,
2010.
what, 80,000 a year? We need per year more, don't we?
You're spot on. It's not enough. We've got to build more, and I think most experts agree that we need to get up around the 300,000 a year level on a sustainable basis across the cycle in order to start tackling
with government money, or is this all about the private sector?
Well, this is going to be a mix, because we've got planning permissions. In London alone, there are 270,000 residential planning permissions that haven't been built. In some cases, it's about viability of sites. In some cases, it's infrastructure needed. If there's infrastructure needed, we can intervene with government money to build it. If it's site viability, we may be able to intervene at the margin to make a non-viable site into a viable one. So we will look at all the tools available to government in the planning system, through compulsory purchase powers, the use of the power of the purse. But I would just say this, Robert, simply pouring money into the housing market will make the problem worse if we don't also tackle the real supply shortages. availability of building land, skills in the construction sector, the number of firms, particularly small firms, available to carry out this house building, and indeed some bottlenecks in materials supplies as well.
Would you like to see looser borrowing controls on local councils so they can borrow a bit more for social housing?
Well, again, you're tempting me into an area that I might discuss in the budget, and of course, shortly after the budget, there will be a local government finance settlement announcement from Sajid Javid. So we've got plenty of opportunity coming up to address these issues.
But it's not just about the private sector for you. You accept that we don't have enough social housing?
It's not just about the private sector. We need more affordable housing. We need more private rented housing, purpose-built private rented housing, and we need more accessible homes to buy so that the next generation can enjoy the same kind of opportunities that their parents did.
Now, it's perfectly clear, both from your last election manifesto and from what the Prime Minister has said recently, that you're not going to rip up the restrictions on building on the Green Belt. But do you think there could be a bit more building on the Green Belt?
Well, we've set out some very clear and strong protections for the Green Belt, and we have committed to them, and we're going to maintain them. But there are lots of things that we can do, including ensuring that the very many planning permissions that are being granted now are actually built out. We do need to get to the bottom of why there is this huge gap between planning permissions granted and housing units built.
Now, just to move on to something which is going to underpin your budget judgments, just before we voted for Brexit, Britain was pretty much the fastest growing of the big rich economies. We're now the slowest growing of the big rich economies. Is that because of that Brexit vote?
Well, it's because we're going through a period of uncertainty, which I hope will start to be resolved very soon. I hope that...
I mean, the governor says it's related to the Brexit vote.
Well,
Is he right?
I hope that within the next few weeks we will see much more clarity about how we're moving forward with our future relationship with the European Union. And I hope to give in the budget a much clearer vision of what post-Brexit Britain looks like. And that, for post-Brexit Britain to be a great success, we have to embrace the change that is coming down the line at us, embrace the technological revolution that we're on the brink of, and in which Britain is actually playing a very, very important role. And that's why I'm optimistic about the British economy, because we have a leading role in a whole raft of new technologies that will transform the way we live, the way our economy works, the way we work as individuals.
I mean, it's possible to be optimistic about the British economy in general, but nonetheless recognise that different types of Brexit can be better or worse for Britain. Now, some of your cabinet colleagues and a very successful businessman like James Dyson argue that we shouldn't be afraid of a no-trade deal Brexit, that can be made to be good for Britain. Do you agree?
Well, I think that the greater the level of access we're able to achieve to our existing markets in Europe as we leave the European Union, the better. Businesses have existing customers, existing supply chains, and the less disruption to them, the better it will be. But of course, we will make our way in the world after Brexit. We will carve new markets. But why throw away existing markets if we can agree to retain access to them?
And just before we go into the break, very briefly, are you confident we will get a trade deal?
I am increasingly confident that we will get a deal with the European Union that works for Britain and that works for the EU, because I think it makes sense on both sides to maintain what is a very important pattern of business for British businesses and for European businesses.
Well, please don't run away, because we've got so much more to ask. After the break, I'll be back with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. We learned over the weekend that the Chancellor is backing driverless cars. We haven't quite worked out how to do a guestless programme, so the Chancellor is still with me, which is great news. Now, every week, Chancellor, we ask our viewers to put a question to our guests. So, Andrew Maron has, because I think he knows a bit about your form on Brexit and Remain and all of that, and he says, please outline one positive economic benefit that Brexit will deliver. Not will it be OK, just a positive benefit.
Well, it could give us opportunities to explore regulatory innovations, and by that I mean things like creating a regulatory environment where new tech businesses can flourish and prosper more quickly here than they would be able to in a more heavily regulated environment. So
do you think what you're doing with driverless cars
exactly.
is something that would have been harder to do if we were staying in the EU?
Well, look, the way the EU works is when new technologies come along, often it takes the European Union a little bit of time to get round to grabbing in Brussels the power to regulate them. So you often start off with national regulations and then it gets swept up into Brussels later on. Once we're outside the EU, of course, we'll be able to make national regulations for the long term, trying to stimulate new technology sectors in this country. And I'm very clear that our post-Brexit future has to be about embracing change, embracing new technology, so that we can create the high-paid, high-value jobs in this country that we need in the future.
Now, social media has gone slightly bonkers this morning about something you said a bit earlier on the BBC related to this technological change, because in the course of that you said there is no unemployment, and obviously, you know, unemployment is at quite low levels, but there are quite a lot of unemployed people.
So of course I didn't mean that. There's 1.4 million unemployed people in this country. That's 1.4 million too many. But we have record low levels of unemployment. It hasn't been this low since the 1970s. But the point I was making to your former colleague, Andrew Marr, is that previous waves of technological change have not resulted in millions of people being long-term unemployed. They've been reabsorbed into the workforce.
There have been periods of industrial change where workers' conditions have suffered for quite a long time.
So, Robert, the choice is this. This change is going to happen. We either embrace it and we are at the forefront of it, or we try and hide from it and it will happen to us anyway. I think we've got to embrace it. Britain has got to be leading the next technological revolution. We've got to prepare British workers with the skills they need, with the retraining they need to be able to embrace this change with confidence, to take up the new jobs that will be created in a higher skilled, higher paid, higher value adding economy.
But is it about...
we have to make the new technological revolution work for us to make Britain a better place.
But is it about deregulation or increased regulation? I'll tell you why. It's simply because many of the technological changes we're seeing are creating jobs which have been less secure, where people live sort of hand to mouth, not knowing what their incomes will be, whether indeed they will be offered work on any particular day.
Well, the economy is changing, of course it's changing, and regulation needs to change to embrace the new technologies, the new ways of working in the economy. It's about...
Driverless cars sound quite scary to lots of people.
It's a technology.
Whether you're a taxi driver or whether you're a passenger.
So I completely understand that, but this technology is coming. The only choice we have to make is whether Britain is going to be at the forefront of it, creating hundreds of thousands of new, highly paid jobs as a centre of development and commercialisation of driverless vehicles, or whether we're going to try and hide from it, and as has so often happened in the past, find that the technologies in which we were leading go elsewhere to be developed and commercialised. I want to see Britain at the cutting edge in biotechnology, in materials science, in artificial intelligence, in big data manipulation, and the many, many areas of new technology that are going to change the way we work. And I am confident that if we give people the skills and the retraining opportunities they need, we will be able to turn this into an opportunity for Britain, not a threat to Britain. And that's what I was trying to say to Andrew Marr this morning.
Now, there is a bitter cabinet division, getting back to Brexit, on how much we should be paying as our so-called divorce bill, with some of your colleagues saying we must not pay a penny more than our absolutely clear legal obligations. Are they right, the Boris Johnsons?
Well, no, I agree with that. We should pay what we owe, and we should negotiate hard wherever there's
But
any
British legal advice
about
appears to be somewhat at loggerheads with European legal advice on this. I mean, we broadly think we owe 20, they think we owe 60.
And that's not surprising, actually. Anybody who's been involved in litigation over debts will be familiar with a situation where both sides start very far apart. Look, there are some things that we're very clear we do owe under the treaties, other things where we dispute the amounts or even whether something should be included or not at all. And of course we'll negotiate hard to get the very best deal we can for the British taxpayer. But in the end, if we owe something, we will pay it. That's the kind of country we are. We will pay our debts.
Now, a couple of very quick things. One is there is certainly in my mind, uncertainty about what this transition period would mean if we get it. Prime Minister says trade deal completely done before we move into transition. Most other people I talk to say that's for the birds. We can't do all of the negotiations on trade, and there will still be negotiations during transition. Which is it?
Well, an implementation period would start when we leave the EU in March 2019 and run on for a defined period of time from that. And we hope, of course, that we will have our new trade relationship with the European Union.
But you're not ruling out, are you, that there may still be a bit of negotiation that needs to be done?
Well, we hope that it will be agreed. Certainly in principle, that the big elements of it will be agreed before March 2019, so that everybody knows where we're going.
Now, I've got one final quick question to you. When you were Foreign Secretary, you were not an unpopular person within your own party. You're now arguably the minister that quite a lot of your MPs would most like to be sacked. What happened?
Well, I think probably what I would observe, Robert, is if you stick your head above the parapet, there will be people who take potshots at it.
And will you still be Chancellor in a few weeks' time?
Well, that's not for me to decide, of course. At the moment, by the way, I've spent most of the year listening to predictions of my demise. In the meantime, I'm just getting on with the job. There's a big budget to do on Wednesday, and then some big challenges and opportunities ahead for Britain.
Lovely to see you. Thanks so much.